Right, WooCommerce and compliance are basically website compliance type thing. It's not specifically WooCommerce, but I just put WooCommerce in because it's the most popular e-commerce plugin out there. So I'm Will Brown, if you don't know me already, one of the WordPress meetup organizers, and welcome to this little bit delayed WordPress Sydney evening meetup. I say tonight's topic focus is going to be website compliance, mostly focusing on e-commerce sites. Okay, just want to have a quick thank you to some of our sponsors. So we have sponsors Kinetics, WP Engine, Plesk, WordPress, and Microsoft. They give us bits and bobs in the form of money, locations, access to stuff, software, pats in the back, swag, all that sort of good stuff. So if you can, please visit those companies and see what they are about and what they offer. We'll skip that slide here because there's only two of us. And I like to bring everyone's attention to the learn.wordpress.org website. It's relatively new. So it's been up and running for about a year and a bit, maybe almost a couple of years. There's not a huge amount of content there, but it is growing. And it's a great place to go and have a look to see if there's any topics that that might be covered in there. So, if you're wanting something in the WordPress world, probably just best check on there first. It's like the official learning tool for WordPress. There's lots of different courses and stuff out there, of course, for WordPress, but this is coming from the Automatic team as well. So it's going to be top rated stuff. So have a look at that. So let's dive in to the main talk tonight. Again, apologies if I cut out or hack or cough. I'm still recovering from the cold. Okay, so what is online business compliance? Now, in most countries, online businesses must comply with regulation and laws, especially those that directly trade in commodities and services. So it's important that you make sure that you're going to comply with all of that stuff. Now, regulations and laws, they are going to differ depending on which country, maybe which state your business is conducted in. So you really need to look up those specific locations, those specific situations for your business and your location, region, country, etc. So what I'm going to cover tonight is just the general compliance, kind of the big 4 compliance boxes, which is these ones coming up in the next couple of slides. So do I need to comply? I do get asked this quite often. People say, I've only got a small shop and I might only sell, a couple of photos or a couple of paintings that I've done myself. So do I really need to comply with all this stuff? And the easy answer is yes, you do. Now, there's various governmental and regulatory agencies, and they put rules in place to protect consumers and business owners and the like. So you really, while you feel that you may not be breaking the law in your trading, compliance must still be in place to protect everyone. And proclaiming that I didn't know that I should be compliant with that is certainly not something that's going to work, especially not once once something happens and you end up having to get an audit and stuff like that. So that's definitely not gonna hold. So in this case, ignorance is not a valid defense for you. So if you just saying that I didn't know, it is definitely not going to work. Now, the consequences for not complying with regulations and laws are pretty severe. They can result in things like taxation audits and investigations. They are very, very costly. So not only in terms of time that you have to take to produce documents and compliance and show that you're all certified, all of the audits and investigations that the company, the government agencies do, they will charge you for that as well. So it's not just the fact, a couple of people coming around and rifling through your stuff. They're going to be charging you thousands of dollars, like it's a legal thing. So taxation audits and investigations are not fun, and they are very, very costly. Also, you could be having fines, and we're not talking about a few $1,000 here. We're talking in the millions of dollars range for those. If you have something like a data breach, that you didn't cover yourself for, then that is a huge fine, millions of dollars in range. You could, of course, get your business shut down entirely. That's definitely an outcome. And because we're talking serious, it could result in jail time, depending on what has happened. So do you need to comply? Yes, you absolutely do need to make sure that you are complying with all these aspects, these legal aspects. Okay, so there are 4 significant e-commerce or general website regulations, but definitely e-commerce regulations that you should be aware of for compliance. The first one is GDPR, and then we've got PCI-DSS, or sometimes called PCI compliance. Then there's COPPA, and then there's shipping. Sorry, that should be PCI-DSS, not PCS. I'll fix that slide. So those are the 4 big ones that you should really cover yourself for if you are trading online. And let's start spin into some of these a little bit in more detail just now. So the first one we talked about was the General Data Protection Regulation, or just simply known as GDPR. Now, this one, this policy, this procedure, this offers privacy protection to users when browsing or shopping online. Now, specifically, the regulation was ratified by the European Commission back in May 5th, 2018. And it requires websites to notify EU users what data they have collected and how the information is collected, processed, and used. Now, even though your business, our businesses here are in Australia, even though they're outside the EU, if you are directly targeting EU users or customers or clients, this regulation still will apply to you. So just because we're running our business in Australia, we are not completely immune from this GDPR policy. Now, GDPR, it's also known as the cookie law because the regulations covers the disclosure of data being collected in cookies on users' local web browsers. So this was a big thing in the run-up to the regulation when it was ratified and came into effect. A lot of websites, a lot of European websites, all of the European websites had to have this little cookie consent banner that came up that asked people's permission to store that data on their local PC. And then you had to have a privacy policy as well that would tell you exactly what cookies are being stored, what data is being stored, what you're going to do with it, all that sort of thing. So big business in the GDPR for the EU. And again, us in Australia, we're not totally immune to that. If your target audience, if your ideal client avatar, if you are targeting a section of European users, then you really do need to comply with this GDPR. So that leads to the question is, what is personal data? So, you've got to disclose personal data. You've got to tell people, give people permission in this GDPR as to what you're going to do with it, tell them how you're collecting it, how it's being processed, all that sort of thing. But we really need to know what is this personal data? Well, what does that actually mean? Well, it means lots of different things to different people, depending on what you are storing and what your business does. But in general, personal data can be covered or classified by these kind of categories. So name, address, location, online identification, so we're talking about emails and usernames, that sort of stuff, your health information, your income as well, if you have to put information in about your salary, that is personal information. Any cultural profile as well, so if it's asking about your background, your ethnicity, all that sort of stuff, that is personal data, and probably lot more. But those are the general categories that would cover, if you don't really know where to start, but what personal data is. That's the broad categories that they are looking for. And basically, it's looking to how you collect, how you store, and how you use that data. You have to abide by all these rules for those. For in particular, if you collect or store any of this data or process this data through other companies, so other companies might pass you that data and you're processing it, then you are then covered by this GDPR law as well. But if you do process those data for companies or EU citizens, then of course you're going to need to abide by this GDPR rules. Now, GDPR also gives EU citizens certain rights. Those rights are listed on the right-hand side of this slide here. So they are things like they have the right to download the data. So download the data that you store on your website about them. They have the right to have their data forgotten. Now, the reason it uses the word forgotten and not deleted is that As business owners, we still need to comply with our local laws and regulations, which means we probably need to store data so we can then provide that to the tax office or something else. So we as business owners probably do need to keep copies of information. So whereas the person has the right to have that data forgotten, that is removed from online systems, but not deleted or purged from absolutely everywhere. They also have the right to know where the data is being stored. Now, this gets a bit messy sometimes if you're hosting your WordPress website somewhere and don't really know where it's being hosted. Now, a lot of the bigger hosting options, SiteGround, WP Engine, Kinetic, that sort of place, they give you this option to store your data in some data center. So it might be in Europe, it might be in the USA, it might be in Australia, that sort of stuff. So that's good. But a lot of the services don't, and that's hidden, and you're not really sure where your data is being stored. And again, if you need to comply with GDPR, if you're targeting EU citizens, then you need to know where that data is being processed, because they need to know. These EU citizens need to know exactly where their data is being processed or is being stored in. Last couple of ones is know how and why data is being processed. And not only do you have to tell them what you are storing, you have to actually tell them why you need it and what you're going to do with it. And of course, the big one is you need to notify people of any data breaches immediately for that. So those are the general things, what's personal data, and these are the kind of the rights that EU citizens have to demand about their personal data on your business websites. So GDPR, WordPress itself comes with tools. So after GDPR was ratified, maybe just a little bit before that, WordPress put in these extra tools for people to be able to be compliant with this new law. So WordPress comes with these tools to export and erase personal data, should you need to comply with those parts of GDPR. And that is covered within the WordPress core. So if somebody registers, for example, they've got data on your system, then somebody can request what data is in there, and they can request to export that. And they can also request to that be erased or removed from the WordPress system as well. And this also extends to WooCommerce. So if you're running WooCommerce on top of the WordPress stack, then this works with the WooCommerce data as well. Now, not all plugins are going to be covered by this. So you need to check to see if what particular plugin, if you're storing personal data with that plugin, if that is going to be covered within these particular core tools or not for those. And it's a relatively easy process. People can request what data that they store on your WordPress website. You come into the background here, the dashboard, you come into one of these tools, the export or erase, you put in their email address and it fires off an email to that person to verify that they are the actual person requesting. And it's largely automated from that. The person will click on that, they'll get taken to a link on the website, they'll be able to download a zip file of all the data that's stored in the user meta, the users, the WooCommerce tables, all that sort of stuff, that they can then have a look and see what data it is. And of course, the erase one as well is very similar. It's a kind of automated tool, but you do get to, as an admin, overview and approve that one as well. So it's not fully autonomous. But WordPress does come with those tools to help you comply with the GDPR law. Okay, that's that one. The next one is PCI DSS, or just PCI compliance, which a lot of people just call it. It stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. It's a bit of a mouthful, which is why people just call it PCI compliance. The Security Standard Council, it's an international body, it's a standalone body, and they set the payment card industry data standard. So that's the PCI-DSS guidelines to protect the security of credit card payments. Now, e-commerce businesses, they must comply with PCI standards to ensure that credit card and debit card data and payments accepted from branded credit cards like Visa, MasterCard, Amex, that sort of stuff, to make sure they are handled accordingly and uphold to the strictest privacy measures. Online fraud is a huge underground business just now, and it's growing every year more and more and more. So this PCI standards are in there to try and stop and try to prevent the growth of that particular bad activity. Now, in all, there are 12 PCI-DSS requirements. Let's just walk through some of these, all of them just now, and we'll see kind of how that applies to your business running WordPress, what it actually means. Okay. Number one. The first one is build, maintain, and secure networks by installing firewalls. Now, you should, of course, be choosing a credible web host to install your WordPress website on. And, you know, they're going to be using their own internal systems as well. So you're kind of covered by that, well, you'd hope. But you can do some things yourself. So you should probably a good idea if you're running an e-commerce website is to install a firewall plugin, such as WordFence or iTheme Security or Securi, something like that, that's going to give you, as a business owner, a WordPress site owner, some sort of flexibility, some sort of filter to be able to see what security stuff is happening with your website, you know, any attacks are coming in, any kind of bad stuff that you can find on your own before, you know, the web host gets at that sort of level. So you can always install a firewall plugin, and that is you will have met that requirement. The next one is don't use vendor supplied default settings. Now, default vendor settings can come in software as well as hardware. So we're talking about things like usernames and passwords, you know, that you then use to log in initially and set up systems. So that could be a plugin. For example, it could be a device that's attached to your particular PC or server. So default usernames and passwords, they are widely documented and available for hackers, and they could be used as like an attack vector into your system. So if you are supplied a plugin that requires a login, make sure that you change the password, if not the username as well, for extra security, and don't just use the default one. Protect all cardholder data is the next one. So even if you are not storing that actual credit card information yourself, you might be using Stripe or PayPal, which then, you know, processes all that card information and they do that thing. Even if you're not actually storing card details, you still need to protect the additional cardholder data, and that's the personal data, the private data, such as name, email, phone, physical address, etc. So you need to protect all cardholder data and not just the card data itself. Number 4 is encrypt transmission of cardholder data. So all the cardholder data needs to be transmitted using SSL encryption. And again, we're not just talking about the payment processing of the card. We're talking about, you know, registrations, WooCommerce registrations, collecting people's username, password, email address, all that sort of information there. So what we're talking about here are SSL certificates. Now, SSL certificates, they are issued freely now through the Let's Encrypt organization. So there's no excuse for anyone not to be able to have an SSL certificate for those, and running your entire website, not just your checkout page. Make sure your entire website is running HTTPS, just so that everything is nice and secure. And you're also going to receive a slight SEO benefit as well from Google if your entire website runs on HTTPS. It's pretty standard now. So if you're not running SSL on your website, you really should probably do that tonight or tomorrow morning. Number 5 is maintain a policy that addresses information security. Now, make sure that you regularly keep your WordPress website up to date, your themes and your plugins as well, and apply all the latest security patches. But also ensure that you and your customers use secure usernames and passwords, ideally using like multi-factor authentication, stuff like that. So this also covers any third-party systems connected to your e-commerce sites, such as CRMs or email marketing systems or stuff. So just make sure that you've got a policy in place that addresses the information security, that makes it secure for people and systems to connect to your WordPress website. Next one, number 6, install and actively update antivirus software. Now, again, if you're running a web firewall like WordFence, then just make sure you keep that update. In fact, there's an option to auto-update itself if you're using WordFence. Other than that, this is more covered by your hosting provider. So your web host provider should have this covered on their own web server, on their own systems there. However, you as a shop manager as well, and a website owner, you kind of need to have antivirus software installed on your local computers that you use to manage your WordPress websites. Now, I know that a lot of the e-commerce clients that I work with, they do a lot of exporting of data. So they'll export products, they'll export payments and orders and stuff like that onto their local PC. Maybe that's in a Dropbox folder, maybe it's on a Google Drive folder, which is synced up to the cloud, but it's still stored on that local computer. And a lot of people forget that hackers can get access to local systems as well. So that's why if you're managing this sort of stuff, really ideally, if you don't have a virus software system on your PC just now, it's probably a good idea to go and get one just to make sure you're complying with this particular rule. Excuse me, lots of talking. Number 7 is restrict access to cardholder data on a need-to-know basis. If you are storing cardholder data or customer data on an e-commerce website, for example, WooCommerce registrations, that sort of stuff, just make sure that those people who are logging into your website, so you might have a shop manager or somebody in charge of updating products, that sort of stuff, just make sure that they don't have access to that customer data if they don't actually need it. And that's all this rule is really about. So just make sure you restrict user roles and levels, and don't make everyone administrator, editor, or shop manager. Number 8 is restrict physical access to data. Now, again, this is probably I probably covered this with antivirus software, but again, where customer data is stored in data centers, paper copies, or workstations, you need to have procedures in place to make sure that that data stays secure wherever it is. And again, we're talking about downloading CSV exports from your WooCommerce store, your business website onto your local PC, up into the cloud, that sort of stuff. You need to make sure that is protected and other people can't access that. Number 9 is assign a unique ID for all user access. Now, this requirement is for tracking, basically, and tracing if there's any security breaches, and that's covered by WordPress. WordPress gives each user a unique ID when they're registering, usually an email address, but they've also got a unique ID in the database. So WordPress has that one covered for you. Number 10 is regularly test security systems and processes. And again, you should be updating your WordPress plugins and themes regularly. Make sure they're running the latest version, so that's you kind of covering that particular part. But you should also be aware of how your website is set up and actively ensure that all the entry points are updated and secure. And again, we're talking about your connection to your CRM. We're talking about connection to your mail system, maybe your Zapier account, what about your FTP accounts as well, things like that. Just making sure that they're all secure, testing them every so often, maybe every 6 months, just to make sure that, they're still working, they're still closed and all that. Number 11, second last one, is track and monitor network access. Now, I don't think you as a business owner are obliged to do this per se if you're just running a WordPress website up in the cloud somewhere. If you're a business owner and you've got multiple people on site logging into workstations, then yes, you need to do that. But if you're just a single person, I don't think you need to go to that level on your own PC. And more importantly, your web host provider is probably going to track all this stuff on your behalf through the website and through their web servers. So if you have customer data on a local network, again, you probably need to think about tracking and monitoring stuff. But other than that, if we're just talking about a solo person here with a WordPress e-commerce website up on say WP Engine, then for the most part, the web host is going to cover this particular element for you. And the last one is maintain a policy to address information security. Now, the policies addresses the usage of critical technology, how to implement risk assessment processes, information security responsibilities, and all that sort of stuff as well. So the information security policy needs to be maintained annually and recorded changes as well. So this could be your privacy policy on your website. You can make sure that's kept up to date, adding new stuff in for those, but you need to have something in place, some sort of written document that shows that you as a business owner are actively addressing information security. So those are the 12 PCI-DSS requirements. It's always good to go through them one by one and just see how they relate to running a WordPress website. So hopefully that's taken care of that. Okay, so that was PCI-DSS, and that's the second of the big four that we're covering tonight. The third one is COPPA. So every website e-commerce or otherwise, that targets minors in the USA are subject to this particular law. It's the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. Now, COPPA was signed into US law in 1998, and it sought to protect children data from being collected without their consent, or without the consent of their parents. Now, even if your website is hosted outside the USA, and this is kind of similar, getting to similar grounds with us being in Australia and the GDPR in the EU, even if your website is hosted outside the USA, if you directly target children from the USA, if that's particularly your niche, if that's your industry, if it's a particular segment that you deal with, that you know about, then your website should comply with COPPA. Now, because COPPA is a US-based regulation, it would be difficult, but not impossible, for them to act against a foreign or Australian business. It depends, I guess, on the severity of the breach. However, Australia itself does protect the consent and collection of children's data, and that is protected under the Australian Privacy Act of 1988. And what I'm going to do is, I've got all these links to all these stuff I'm talking about, so I'll post all the links on the meetup group and on the Facebook page, Facebook group, and on YouTube as well. So you'll have all the links after this to see the relevant documents for that. But while COPPA is a US-based law, we do have something very, very similar, on the basic rights to protect the consent of children, and that's in Australia's Privacy Act in 1988, which you should most definitely comply with if your target audience includes kids. Okay, so that was COPPA, or COPPA. The last one we're going to cover tonight is shipping regulations. Now, while shipping regulations isn't an act, it's not a law, it's not a regulation as per se, it's like a collection of stuff. That's what I want to talk about tonight. So shipping companies and couriers, they're going to have restrictions on certain items that they will not ship. So restricted items can vary depending on industry and business and countries, states, territories, all that sort of stuff. But in general, we're talking about these things here, like aerosols, dry ice, gas bottles, explosives, weapons, that kind of the regular stuff that you would assume that would have some sort of regulations on them. Now, some countries, they also ban the import and export of certain commodities as well. So you need to check with your couriers to see which items are restricted. So if you are dealing in something that you think might be, have a few issues or definitely have regulations to put in place, then you definitely need to check with your couriers, check with your country's government, trade body as well, to see what items can and can't be imported and exported. In Australia, we all know that, we can't bring live meat and stuff into the country. When we're coming back from holidays, there's very, very severe biosecurity regulations when coming into Australia. And that could also be the same for other countries as well. So there's some places that you can go and see if you are trading in these types of items, or you're just unsure. So there's the Australian Border Force website, the ABF website. So you can have a look at restrictions across state borders and things like that. There's the Australian government import-export laws. So there's a website there that you can check, and that's more for international stuff. So what stuff as a country level can we be exporting and importing to and from the country? And then lastly, there's the DFAT one. So this is for international trade agreements. So there could be so things that might not be covered internationally, that might not be able to export, could be included in a trade agreement for that. So it's always to have a good idea to have a look and see if there's any specific trade agreements that are set up with international bodies, corporations, or countries that you might be able to get your commodity through using that as well. But shipping is huge, so really, I think it does fit in with this this talk about compliance, because moving stuff around, you definitely need to know what the legal stuff are when you're moving between states and territories and countries. Okay, so those are the big four regulations that if you are an online business, then you probably should know about and definitely comply with these things. Shipping is a bit more flexible, but definitely the first three definitely should make sure you are covered with those. And as always, I like to try and put something extra for those. So the last slide that I have for tonight is this one here. So there are other legal things for websites in general. So again, we're not just specifically talking about e-commerce websites here. We're talking about general websites, company, brochure websites, blog sites, stuff like that. So I have an infographic and the link is there. So it's willbrand.com and it's what legal pages do you need on your website. I think it's the first blog that I released on the website. And it's just a little infographic and it goes down. So you start and you just have a question and do you conform with that? And it's just going to tell you what sort of stuff that you need on your website. So for example, do you have one or more contact forms on your website? Yes. Well, then you're collecting personal information, example, email, web URL stuff. Your website needs a privacy policy. And you just go down that one, cover things like privacy policy, terms and conditions, disclaimer, code of conduct, comment policy, and the like. So you can have a look at that. If you're not too sure where you start, if you're not too sure if you've got these things on your website, it can tell you which documents that you need. But I guess more importantly, if you're doing client work, especially for the smaller clients, maybe like the one-man shows, that they're doing things like, cleaners, gardeners, electricians, tradesmen, that sort of stuff, maybe like freelancers, contractors, they might not be fully aware that they need to have these particular policy pages in place. And, it always happens, if you don't have it in place and something happens, then, that's what insurance is for. So if you are running client websites, just make sure that, as part of your development process, as part of the delivery process, project management process, that you cover these things and just make sure that the client knows that they should be there. Again, it's their responsibility. However, as being helpful people that we are, developers and designers, just give them a little nudge in that direction. Okay, everyone, if you have any questions, that's it for tonight. Any questions, you can drop them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, Jean and Andrew, and ask me some questions directly if you've got anything that you want to cover in a little bit more detail from those slides. Otherwise, I'll pop this up. So that's my contact information. I've got a new website, willbrand.com. Please visit that, have a look. I've got lots more content that's coming through there at the moment, but I'm mostly on LinkedIn these days under willbrandau. On Instagram as well, I share my cat pictures, willbrand_au, and my Twitter rants is willbrand_au as well. So please connect with me if you haven't already. You just drop me a line on LinkedIn, connect with me on that, and that'd be good. Just have a look at the comments. Can't see anything there at the moment.
Can I ask a question, Will?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So do you protect yourself with, with your contracts to put, to say that it's the client's responsibility to get those legal pages done and not yours?
I don't have anything in my contract, but it's very clear that as a business owner, it's their responsibility. So all the stuff I've been covering tonight is from a business owner's perspective. Us as developers and designers, we just make the things look pretty. But at the end of the day, it's the business owner's legal right to make sure that they comply with this stuff. So I think it's always good to cover that, to talk through this with your client, just to make sure that they know that's doing. But in the end of the day, making sure that they're compliant with things is their responsibility. Now, if we develop a bit of work for them that then, that doesn't, or it hinders that process or gets in the way of that process, then we could be held accountable for not providing the work properly, and we could probably be sued for that. But the actual compliance part of that would be under the business owner, because they should have checked and tested and made sure it was working.
Yep. Okay. Makes sense. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for your presentation, and hope to see you next month in person.
I hope to be up and running in person with pizza there. So just to the last comment just before we leave is that the next one is going to be building quizzes in WordPress. So next month, end of the month, it's the last Monday of every month, I'll be talking about building quizzes in WordPress. So that should be a little bit of fun for that as well. Okay, thank you very much, Gene. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll hopefully see you everyone the next event at the end of the month. Okay. Bye everyone.